The night my son was thrown into the storm, I stopped being a daughter. I became something else entirely. The rain hammered against the windows of our old house on the outskirts of Denver like 1,000 angry fists demanding entry. Inside, the storm was worse. I can still hear my own voice, raw and desperate, cutting through the chaos. No, don't do this to my son. The words tore from my throat, but they meant nothing. They never meant anything in this house. My father, Thomas, stood like an iron monument in the center of the living room, his eyes bloodshot with rage and whiskey. In his massive hand, he gripped his leather belt, not the way a man adjusts his clothing, but the way a weapon is wielded. The buckle caught the dim lamplight, glinting with promise of pain. This wasn't discipline, this was destruction. David, my 10-year-old son, my entire world compressed into a small body with his father's dark eyes and my stubborn chin, crumpled to the hardwood floor. Each strike of that belt was a knife twisting in my chest. His small frame shook with each impact, and I lunged forward, trying to reach him, trying to be the shield I had failed to be for so long. But my father was a mountain, immovable and merciless. "Stay back, Maria." His voice boomed through the house, and his free hand shot out, striking me across the face. The sting was familiar, almost comfortable in its predictability. I had learned to absorb such blows, but watching David absorb them was something I could never learn to accept. From the doorway of the dining room, my sister Sophia stood with a crystal glass of red wine in her manicured hand. She wasn't horrified. She wasn't even surprised. She was smiling. That cold, superior smile she had perfected over 35 years of being the favorite, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. He should know his place, Sophia said, taking a leisurely sip of her wine. Her diamond bracelet caught the light as she gestured dismissively toward my son. Just like his mother. Trash knows trash, right? The words hit harder than my father's hand, because they were designed to. Sophia had always known exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. She had spent our entire childhood perfecting the art of psychological warfare, learning which buttons to push, which insecurities to exploit. And now she was turning that expertise on my son. "My son is not your slave," I screamed, finding my feet again. "He has a name. He has dignity." The moment the words left my mouth, I knew they were meaningless. Dignity didn't exist in this house. It had been systematically stripped away, piece by piece, year after year. My father's hand clamped around David's collar, and he dragged my son toward the back door. David's feet scrambled for purchase on the slick floor, his small hands clawing at his grandfather's arm. "The storm will wash away his stubbornness," Thomas growled. "Teach him what you never learned, Maria. Obedience." "No! Please!" I threw myself at my father's arm, trying to pull him back, but he swung his elbow back and caught me in the ribs. The air rushed from my lungs, and I collapsed against the wall. Through blurred vision, I watched as he opened the back door. The wind immediately invaded the house, bringing sheets of rain with it, and then he threw David out into the storm. My son's scream cut through the roar of wind and rain, a sound so primal, so filled with terror and betrayal, that I felt something inside me fracture. Not break, fracture. Like a windshield after an impact, still whole but covered in a spiderweb of cracks, ready to shatter completely with one more blow. David hit the wooden deck and rolled, his small body tumbling down the 3 steps into the muddy grass. The rain swallowed him immediately, his red t-shirt disappearing into the gray darkness. I could hear him crying, calling for me, but I couldn't reach him. My father stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a wall of flesh and fury between me and my child. From upstairs, I heard clapping. Slow, deliberate, mocking. Sophia stood on the landing, her wine glass raised in a toast. "Bravo, Dad! Absolutely brilliant! A lesson the little brat will never forget." My mother, Eleanor, emerged from the kitchen, her reading glasses perched on her nose, a cup of coffee in her hand. She surveyed the scene with the mild interest of someone observing a slightly interesting television program. "Well," she said, her voice calm and measured, "at least the rain is accomplishing what you never could, Maria, teaching him proper behavior." I looked at her, this woman who had given birth to me, who had once sung lullabies and braided my hair. When had she become this? Or had she always been this, and I had simply been too young, too naive, too desperate for love to see it? "He's 10 years old," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the storm. "He's just a child." "He's your child," Sophia said, descending the stairs with the grace of a predator. "Which makes him weak, worthless. A burden on this family, just like you've always been." She stopped in front of me, so close I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the wine on her breath. "You know what I think, little sister? I think you should have been the one Dad threw out, years ago, before you infected this family with your weakness." The fractured thing inside me pulsed with heat. It wasn't breaking anymore. It was transforming. Rage, pure and focused, began to fill every crack, every fissure, turning the spiderweb of fractures into something else, something molten. "Get out of my way," I said quietly. Thomas laughed. "Try it. Open that door, and I'll throw you out too. Let you cuddle with your mistake in the mud. I looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who had terrorized me for 30 years. This man who I had tried so desperately to please, to win approval from, to earn even a scrap of affection. I had spent my entire life trying to be worthy in his eyes, and in that moment, staring at his cruel smile, I realized something profound. I didn't want to be worthy in the eyes of a monster. I walked to the window instead. David was curled under the eaves of the old garden shed, trying to shield himself from the worst of the rain. His body shook violently, whether from cold or fear or both, I couldn't tell. He looked so small. So alone. That's right, Thomas said behind me. Watch. Learn. This is what happens when you raise a child to be soft. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. David looked up, and our eyes met through the rain-streaked window. In his gaze, I saw something that made my decision for me. Not fear, not a plea for rescue, but a question. The same question he had asked me countless times over the years, the question I had never been able to answer honestly. Why, Mama? Why do they hate us? I turned away from the window and walked upstairs to my room. Behind me, I heard Sophia's triumphant laugh. That's it! Give up! That's all you've ever been good at. I closed the door to my small bedroom, the room I had occupied since childhood, barely changed since I was 16. The same faded wallpaper, the same narrow bed, the same sense of being trapped in amber, preserved in a moment of perpetual inadequacy. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited. The storm raged for hours. I counted every minute. Every second David spent out there alone, I counted. And with each minute, the heat inside me grew hotter. By the time the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the curtains, I wasn't Maria anymore. I was something new, something forged in the crucible of that endless night. When I was certain everyone was asleep, drunk on their cruelty and satisfaction, I crept downstairs. The house was silent except for the sound of my father's snoring from the master bedroom. I slipped out the back door. David was still under the shed's eaves, his lips blue, his entire body trembling. I scooped him up, and he was so cold it felt like holding a block of ice. Mama, he whispered, his teeth chattering so hard he could barely speak. Shh, baby. I've got you. I carried him inside, to my room, wrapped him in every blanket I owned, held him against me until the shaking subsided. As dawn fully broke, he finally fell asleep in my arms, exhausted beyond measure, and that's when he asked the question. Barely conscious, more asleep than awake, but the words came out clear. Mama, why do they hate me? The question embedded itself in my chest like a blade. Not why do they hate us, why do they hate me? My son, my innocent child, was already internalizing the poison of this family. Already believing he was the problem. That blade began to carve something into my heart, not words, but a promise, a vow written in the language of rage and love combined. The next morning arrived with sunshine, as if the storm had never happened. The house pretended nothing had occurred. That was how it worked here. Terrible things happened, and then everyone moved on as if they hadn't. The victim was expected to swallow the pain, file it away, and return to their role in the family theater. Sophia found us in the kitchen. David was eating cereal, still wrapped in a blanket, his eyes hollow. She threw a dirty dish towel at his feet. Clean the bathroom, she commanded. The toilet's disgusting, and you're the only one in this house who deserves to touch it. David stared at the towel, then at her, then at me. Pick it up, Sophia said, her voice dripping with contempt. Or do you need another lesson in thunder and lightning? My father entered, coffee mug in hand. Don't coddle him, Maria. He needs to understand his place. You want him to grow up to be a weak man like you are a weak woman? My mother joined them, settling into her chair with a satisfied sigh. That boy is your reflection, Maria. Useless. A burden. Sophia's children, now they bring pride to this family. They're worth investing in. Your son? She waved her hand dismissively. He's just taking up space. I said nothing. But my silence wasn't fear. Not anymore. It was calculation. For the next 2 weeks I observed everything. I became invisible, which was easy because I had been practicing invisibility my entire life. But now I was invisible with purpose. I watched my father in his workshop, that old wooden shed behind the house where he kept his collection of tools. He called them his legacy, the physical manifestation of his masculinity and skill. Saws, drills, hammers, wrenches, all arranged with obsessive precision. He would spend hours in that shed, polishing his tools, organizing them, talking about them with anyone who would listen. They were more than objects to him. They were proof of his worth. I watched my mother in the dining room, dusting and polishing her glass cabinet filled with silver cutlery and porcelain dishes. She had spent 40 years collecting these items, each piece carefully selected and acquired. The cabinet was her throne room, and she was its queen. She would tell anyone who visited about the history of each piece, where it came from, how much it cost, what it represented. These objects were her identity, her proof that she had made it, that she was cultured and refined. I watched Sophia in her bedroom, surrounded by designer handbags, expensive jewelry, brand-name clothes. She treated her possessions like armor, each item a shield against the world's judgment. She believed these things made her untouchable, superior, beyond reproach. She would post photos on social media constantly, showcasing her latest purchases, reveling in the envy she imagined others felt. And I began to form a plan. Late at night, after everyone slept, I would sit with David in my room. He was different now, quieter, more withdrawn. The spark that had defined him, his curiosity, his joy, was dimming. I could see it happening in real time, and it terrified me more than anything my family had ever done to me. "Mama," he whispered one night, "are we ever going to leave?" I smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "Soon, baby. Very soon." "Where will we go?" "Somewhere they can't hurt us anymore." "Can we really do that, just leave?" I looked into his eyes, those eyes that still held traces of hope despite everything. "We can do more than that, David. We can make sure they understand exactly what they've lost." Over the following days, I learned the locations of spare keys. I noted my mother's schedule of when she polished her cabinet, when she left the house for her book club, when she was most distracted. I observed Sophia's careless habits, how she left her purse unattended, how she never locked her bedroom door, how she kept her banking information on her laptop that she never bothered to secure. I researched bus schedules out of Denver. I looked up information about domestic violence shelters, about legal aid, about how to disappear. I opened a bank account my family knew nothing about. I began transferring small amounts of money from the household account I was expected to manage, amounts too small to notice, but that, over time, added up to a cushion. And I waited for the rain. 3 weeks after that terrible night, the forecast predicted another storm, a big one. As I watched the dark clouds gathering on the horizon, I felt a strange sense of symmetry. The universe was giving me a stage. I intended to use it. The rain began late afternoon, light at first, then gradually intensifying. By evening, it was a downpour that matched the earlier storm almost precisely. Thunder rolled across the sky. Lightning illuminated the windows in brief, stark flashes. My father sat in the living room, polishing his favorite hammer, a vintage piece he claimed had belonged to his grandfather. My mother was in the dining room, carefully arranging her silver, preparing for a dinner party she was hosting the next day. Sophia was upstairs, taking selfies with her newest handbag, a monstrosity that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I told David to stay in our room. "No matter what you hear," I said, "don't come out, not until I come get you, understand?" He nodded, his eyes wide but trusting. I went to my father's workshop first. The door's lock was old, weak. I had practiced picking it for days using a tutorial I found online. It took 30 seconds. Inside, the workshop smelled of oil and sawdust. All his precious tools hung on the walls or rested in careful rows on his workbench, each one labeled, each one positioned exactly where he wanted it. I began removing them, one by one. Saws, drills, hammers, wrenches, screwdrivers, planes, sanders. I carried them out into the rain, piling them in the center of the backyard. The rain soaked them immediately, rust already beginning its inevitable work on the older pieces. When I had emptied the shed completely, I went to the garage and found the gas can my father kept for the lawnmower. I poured gasoline over the pile of tools. The rain diluted it somewhat, but there was enough. I struck a match. The flame caught despite the rain, fed by the gasoline. It grew quickly, unnaturally bright in the darkness. The paint on the tool handles began to blister and peel. The wooden handles caught fire, burning with intense heat. Metal warped and blackened. The light from the fire drew my father to the window. I heard his roar of rage before I saw him. "My tools! What the hell?" He burst out the back door, running into the rain, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He tried to grab tools from the edge of the fire, burning his hands in the process, cursing and screaming. "These are my legacy, my grandfather's tools. You've destroyed everything." I stood in the rain, watching him. "Legacy?" I said calmly. "You taught me about the value of things you cherish, Father." He turned to me, his face twisted with rage. "You'll pay for this. Everything I built, everything I saved." "Everything you cherished more than your own family," I said. "Consider the lesson learned." I walked past him, back into the house. He tried to grab my arm, but his hands were burned and slippery with rain. I shook him off easily. Inside, my mother had heard the commotion. She was standing at the window, staring at the fire, her hand over her mouth. "What's happening, Thomas's tools?" I walked to the dining room. Her precious cabinet stood against the wall, illuminated by the chandelier above the table. Through the glass doors, I could see all her carefully arranged silver and porcelain. 40 years of collecting, 40 years of proving her worth through objects. I opened the cabinet. "Don't you dare!" My mother screamed, rushing toward me. "Those are mine, my entire collection." I began removing items. Forks, knives, spoons, serving platters, tea sets, each piece carefully selected, each one a story she had told 100 times. I carried them outside, adding them to the fire. My mother followed me, sobbing, trying to grab the items from my hands. "You ungrateful wretch! I've given you everything. This is how you repay me?" I looked at her, this woman who had stood by while her husband threw my son into a storm, this woman who had called my child worthless. "Ungrateful?" I said. "I learned gratitude from sleepless nights, from my son's tears, from years of trying to earn love from people who have none to give." Each piece of silver I threw into the flames turned black, melting, warping. The porcelain shattered from the heat. The cabinet, emptied of its contents, stood like a hollow monument to meaningless achievement. My mother collapsed onto the wet grass, wailing, trying to fish pieces of melted silver from the edges of the fire. Her hands burned, but she didn't seem to care. All she cared about were her things, her proof of status, now reduced to worthless slag. I went upstairs. Sophia's door was unlocked, as always. She was so confident in her superiority that she never imagined anyone would dare enter her sanctuary. I walked into her room, past her massive walk-in closet filled with designer clothes, past her vanity covered in expensive cosmetics, to her desk where her laptop sat open. She was in the bathroom, probably taking more selfies. I had maybe 5 minutes. I knew her passwords. She used the same one for everything, a combination of her birthday and her first boyfriend's name. Predictable. I accessed her banking app and began transferring funds, not to my account, that would be too obvious, to various charities, women's shelters, children's hospitals, organizations that supported domestic violence victims. I made sure each transaction left a paper trail that would be impossible to hide or explain. Then I went to her closet. Every handbag, every piece of jewelry, every designer item she had used as a weapon against me over the years. I took them all. Some I threw into the fire downstairs, others I packed into garbage bags. Those bags would go to a women's shelter in the morning, let someone who actually needed them benefit. I heard Sophia scream from her bedroom. She had discovered her empty closet, her empty jewelry box. Her life's collection of armor, gone. She came running down the stairs, her face purple with rage. "What have you done? Where are my things? My Gucci, my Prada, my Tiffany necklace?" She grabbed my shoulders, shaking me. "Fix this, right now, undo whatever you did." I pulled out my phone and showed her the banking app. "Check your account, sister. You'll see where your precious money went." She stared at the screen, her face going white. I had emptied her account almost completely, leaving just enough to avoid overdraft fees. Years of her living beyond her means, charging credit cards, expecting our parents to bail her out when needed. All of it redistributed. "No," she whispered. No, that's not possible. You can't do that. That's theft." "Theft?" I said. "Like the years you stole from me? The dignity you stole from my son? Consider it restitution." She lunged at me, her manicured nails aimed at my face. I sidestepped, and she crashed into the wall. Behind her, my father was still outside, on his knees in the mud, surrounded by the twisted remains of his tools. My mother was beside him, cradling a lump of melted silver, rocking back and forth. The three of them, reduced to their base elements. No longer the triumvirate of power that had ruled my life, just 3 people mourning objects. I walked upstairs to my room. David was sitting on the bed, exactly where I had left him. "It's time to go," I said. He grabbed his backpack, the one I had packed days ago with clothes, his favorite books, his stuffed elephant. We walked down the stairs together, his small hand in mine. Sophia was on her phone, screaming at her bank's customer service, demanding they reverse the transactions. My mother was being helped inside by my father, both of them crying, their hands bandaged and burned. They looked up as we walked past. "Where do you think you're going?" My father demanded, his voice hoarse. "Away," I said simply. "You can't leave. You're my daughter. You owe me." I stopped at the door and turned to look at him. Really look at him. This broken man surrounded by broken things. "I owe you nothing. Not anymore. You taught me a valuable lesson, Father. The same lesson you tried to teach David. About knowing one's place." "What lesson?" he spat. "That sometimes," I said, "the only way to survive is to become what you fear most." I opened the door. The rain was lessening now, the storm passing. Outside, the fire was dying down, leaving only smoldering ashes and twisted metal. The smell of burned wood and melted plastic hung in the air. "You've destroyed us!" Sophia shrieked. "How could you?" I looked at her, this woman who I had once idolized as a child, who I had desperately tried to impress, to be like. "I haven't destroyed you," I said. "I've just removed the masks, the things you valued more than family. Now you can see yourselves clearly, and that sight will haunt you far more than anything I could do." David and I walked to the end of the driveway where my car was parked. It was an old sedan, nothing special, but it was mine. I had been making payments on it secretly for months. I had packed it earlier with everything we would need. As we drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The house was lit from within, shadows moving frantically behind the windows. The fire in the backyard cast an orange glow against the darkness. Smoke rose into the rainy sky. "Mama," David said quietly from the passenger seat, "are they going to be okay?" I thought about that question. Physically? Yes. Emotionally? That's their problem now, not ours. "Don't you feel bad?" I considered his question seriously. Did I feel bad? For destroying their possessions? For emptying Sophia's account? For reducing my father's precious legacy to ashes? "No," I said honestly. "I feel free." We drove through the night, leaving Denver behind. I had a plan. A friend from college who lived in Seattle had agreed to let us stay with her while I got on my feet. I had applied for jobs online, using a library computer so there would be no trace on my family's shared laptop. I had done research about schools for David, about starting over, about building a life from scratch. David fell asleep around midnight, his head against the window. I drove through the darkness, the highway stretching endlessly before us. Behind us, everything I had ever known was burning. Ahead of us was nothing but possibility. 3 months later, David and I were settled in a small apartment in Seattle. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, a living room barely big enough for a couch. But it was ours, mine and David's. No one could enter without permission. No one could hurt us here. David was thriving in his new school. The haunted look in his eyes was slowly being replaced by something else. Cautious hope at first, then gradually, actual joy. He had made friends. He was laughing again. The spark that had been dimming was reigniting, growing brighter every day. I had found work at a nonprofit that helped women escape domestic violence. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent my days helping other people do what I had done. Leave, start over, reclaim their lives. It was hard work, emotionally draining, but deeply satisfying. My family had tried to contact me, of course. Dozens of calls, texts, emails. At first they were angry, threatening legal action, demanding I return their property, insisting I owed them restitution. Then the messages became desperate, pleading. My mother wrote long emails about family obligations, about forgiveness, about how I was destroying what was left of the family. I blocked all of them. Sophia lost her job. Apparently, when her employer discovered the discrepancies in her account, the large transfers to charities, they had questions. She couldn't explain where the money had come from, or why she had donated it all at once. It looked suspicious, like money laundering or tax evasion. She was fired, and her reputation in her social circle was destroyed. Last I heard through a mutual acquaintance, she was living with our parents, working retail, stripped of all the status symbols she had used to define herself. My father never recovered from the loss of his tools. Without them, he had no identity. The workshop sat empty, a hollow shell. He stopped talking about his legacy. He stopped talking much at all. He had spent so much of his life defining himself through objects that when those objects were gone, there was nothing left. My mother tried to rebuild her collection, but it wasn't the same. She had lost 40 years of carefully curated pieces, and starting over at her age, with limited funds, was impossible. The cabinet remained mostly empty, a constant reminder of what she had lost. More importantly, a reminder of what she had chosen: things over people, status over love. On a rainy evening, almost a year after we left, David and I were cooking dinner together in our small kitchen. We had developed a routine. He would do his homework while I prepared the ingredients. Then we would cook together, talking about our days, about his school, about my work, about everything and nothing. "Mama," he said, carefully stirring the pasta sauce, "do you ever think about them? Grandpa and Grandma and Aunt Sophia?" I measured out the pasta, dumping it into boiling water. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Not as often as I used to." "Do you miss them?" I thought about that. Did I miss my father's rage? My mother's cold indifference? My sister's cruelty? "I miss the idea of them," I said. "The family I thought we could have been. But I don't miss who they actually were." He nodded, understanding in a way that no child should have to understand. "I don't miss them either. Is that bad?" "No, baby, that's healthy." I ruffled his hair. "You can love someone and still know they're bad for you. You can walk away and it's not your fault. They made their choices. We made ours." After dinner, we sat on our small balcony, watching the rain fall over the city. The Seattle rain was different from Denver rain, gentler, more persistent but less violent. The kind of rain that nourished rather than destroyed. "I like it here," David said. "I like our life now." "Me too," I said. "Mama, do you think you'll ever talk to them again?" I pulled him closer, wrapping my arm around his shoulders. "I don't know. Maybe. Someday. If they change. If they truly understand what they did and take responsibility. But that's not my problem to solve. I can't make them better people. I can only make sure we're safe and happy." He leaned against me, comfortable, secure. "I think you're brave." I think we both are. The rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean. In Denver, my family was probably sitting in their house, surrounded by the absence of things, realizing too late that objects could be replaced but people couldn't. That respect, once lost, was almost impossible to regain. That love, when treated as conditional and transactional, eventually dried up completely. They had lost more than possessions that night. They had lost the opportunity to be part of David's life, to watch him grow up, to be grandparents and an aunt in any meaningful way. They had lost me, the daughter and sister who had spent 30 years trying to earn their approval. They had lost the possibility of ever having a real family, one built on love instead of fear and manipulation. And what had they gained? Nothing. Just empty spaces where their treasures used to be, and the hollow echo of their own cruelty bouncing back at them. I had taken their material possessions, yes, but they had already lost what mattered long before that night. They had lost their humanity, piece by piece, choice by choice, cruelty by cruelty. I had simply made that loss visible, tangible, undeniable. People often ask me if I regret what I did. If I feel guilty about destroying their things, about emptying Sophia's account, about leaving them in ashes. I don't, because I didn't destroy a family. There was no family there to destroy. There was only a hierarchy of abuse, a system of power that demanded submission, a toxic environment that was slowly killing both me and my son. I destroyed objects, and in doing so, I saved lives. Mine and David's. That's not something to regret, that's something to celebrate. David started middle school the following year. He joined the robotics club. He made the honor roll. He started talking about college, about becoming an engineer, about building things that helped people. The boy who had been told he was worthless, who had been thrown into a storm, was becoming someone extraordinary. Not despite what happened, but because he had survived it and come out stronger. I was promoted at work, taking on more responsibility, helping to develop programs for families escaping abuse. I started speaking at conferences, sharing my story, becoming an advocate. The woman who had been silent for 30 years found her voice, and it was loud, clear, and unafraid. We built a life, not the life I had imagined as a young woman, not the fairy tale I had hoped for, but a real life, an honest life, a life where love wasn't conditional, where respect was given freely, where mistakes were forgiven and growth was celebrated. On the anniversary of that night, 2 years later, I received a letter. It was from my mother. The envelope was thin, the handwriting shaky. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single page. "Maria," it read, "I am writing to you because your father won't, and Sophia is too proud. We were wrong, all of us. We treated you and David terribly, and there's no excuse for it. I can't speak for the others, but I want you to know that I see it now. The cabinet is empty, and I'm glad. Looking at it every day reminds me of what I chose, things over you, status over family. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to ask for it. But I needed you to know that I understand now what we lost. And it wasn't the silver or the tools or the money. We lost you. We lost David. We lost the chance to be a real family. I hope you're happy, wherever you are. I hope David is thriving. And I hope, someday, you can think of us without pain. With pity, maybe, or indifference. But not pain. You've had enough pain because of us, your mother." I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. David asked me about it later. "What did Grandma say?" "She apologized," I said. "Are you going to write back?" "Not yet. Maybe someday." He accepted that with a nod. "It's okay if you never do, Mama. We're good here. Just us." "Yeah," I said, smiling. "We're good." And we were. The ashes of that night, of that storm, of that fire, had settled. From those ashes, we had built something new. Not a phoenix, rising dramatically from destruction. Just 2 people, learning to live without fear, without shame, without the weight of other people's cruelty. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but that wasn't revenge. Revenge implies I wanted to hurt them for the sake of hurting them. What I did was liberation. I freed us from a prison built of obligation and fear. And if, in the process, they were forced to confront the emptiness of their values, the hollowness of their priorities, the cruelty of their choices, that wasn't revenge. That was justice. Years passed. David graduated high school with honors. He got a full scholarship to MIT. The day he left for college, we stood together at the airport, and he hugged me tight. "None of this would have happened," he said, "if you hadn't been brave that night." "We were both brave," I corrected. "You survived. That took courage too." "What are you going to do now? With me gone?" I smiled. "Live, David, just live. Maybe travel, maybe go back to school myself, maybe write a book. I have time now, time I never had before. I'm proud of you, Mama. I'm proud of us." He boarded his plane, and I watched him disappear into the crowd. My son, my fierce, brilliant, kind son who had survived a storm and come out stronger. Who had learned that family wasn't always blood, that love was something you chose, not something you endured. That walking away from toxicity wasn't weakness but wisdom. I drove home through the Seattle rain, and for the first time in my life, I felt complete. Not because I had a man, or a big house, or expensive things, but because I had myself. I had my son. I had my integrity. And I had the knowledge that sometimes the only way to save a life is to burn the old one to the ground. The ashes had settled long ago. In their place, something new had grown. Something stronger. Something real. That night in Denver, when I lit that fire, I thought I was destroying things. Now I know I was creating a path. For me. For David. For every person who has ever felt trapped in a system designed to break them. You can survive. You can leave. You can build something better. All it takes is the courage to strike a match and let the old world burn. The rain falls softly now. Not a storm. Just rain. Gentle. Persistent. Nourishing. And I am free.